In all of their history, since the fall of the Star League, the battle mechs of the Inner Sphere were, at least theoretically, in approximate technological parity with one another. Some designs were clearly superior in terms of their overall components layout and battlefield functionality, but few machines had an edge that would elevate them above their opponents, ton for ton. The Great House military seemed to almost rely on this as technology declined before stagnating across the entirety of the realms of known human space. No one really managed to push past the era of darkness that encompassed the Inner Sphere, until the Fourth Succession War in the 31st century, where borders changed as never before, and as old technologies were rediscovered, and new innovative steps forward began to take place in the arena of weapons development and mech design. For all of these advances, however, they were monumentally behind the invaders from beyond the Inner Sphere that came only a few years later, who were known simply as the clans. In every aspect of mech construction, the clans were decades, if not centuries ahead of the most cutting-edge Inner Sphere and Star League era advancements that any military from within the traditional human sphere could handle. Even Comstar and their comguards could not match the clans mech for mech. There was only one relatively rare weapon the Inner Sphere had access to that came close to equaling their invading counterparts: the Gauss rifle. After the battle for Tukiad, a new arms race ramped up, particularly amongst the traditional powers who had once comprised the Star League, as they made their attempts to check and defeat the menace that was still on their doorstep. The Draconis Combine and their now former enemy, the Federated Commonwealth, began to share development and insight with one another in this new period of cooperation. New mechs would be the result, and ones built around new ideas. Ones which were meant to put their new adversaries in their graves. One mech in particular, named for the legendary Mechwarrior aces of old from the Star League, ended up being the crowning achievement of this partnership. In this overview, we'll be examining Defiance Industries and Independence Weaponry's collaboration, the Gunslinger. The rivalries between the great houses are legendary in their pettiness and violence. The Succession Wars, the great tragedy that followed the collapse of the Star League in the wake of the Ameris coup, sundered the Inner Sphere, destroying much of its industries and its military science industrial complex, sending technology back centuries to a time before the Star League even formed. The unified Star League had been the height of technology mankind had ever known, at least until the 31st century. Part of the reason for this was simply because of a lack of conflict inside of the core human territories of mankind. This led to a commingling of science and industrial assets across the League, as trade and travel opened to unheard-of levels. An era of prosperity had never been achieved at this scale before, and has yet to be replicated since, at least as of the time of creating this piece. However, there would be a glimmer of cooperation, a light that emerged in the darkness, not just from the discovery of the Helm Memory Core by the Grey Death Legion, but through the wars that visited mankind in the turbulent age of the Final Succession War, through to the terrifying invasion that came from the edge of known space. The Fourth Succession War began to see the usage of new battle mechs and designs by the now allied and eventually unified houses of Davion and Steiner. The Federated Sons and Lyran Commonwealth during the course of this conflict and shortly thereafter merged into a new entity, known as the Federated Commonwealth. Machines such as the Hatchet Man, Wolfhound, as well as advanced new refits of formerly lackluster mechs like the Banshee or even Rifleman, began to make their presence known on the battlefield, which clearly showed the benefits of Davion's priority on pulling themselves out of the darkness of the Succession Wars through the established NAIS. House Steiner had their own industrial and technological development during and prior to their eventual merger with House Davion, making way for a wave of new machines into the future. Their adversaries were punished severely during the Fourth Succession War, with only the compelling Confederation, through desperation, innovating even remotely to the same degree, and still being overwhelmed and smashed by the united House Steiner Davion. At the same time, the Free Worlds League was batted aside, and the Draconis Combine's teeth were shattered by the Wolf's Dragoons and the AFFS. The overall result of the war, a war started on the very wedding between Hans Davion and Melissa Steiner I, was an overwhelming victory across all theaters by the emerging Federated Commonwealth. This, however, is not the end of the preamble, because in the next 2 decades after their humiliating defeat, the powers which lost the Fourth Succession War followed a very similar path to the Commonwealth. The Draconis Combine, for instance, developed the Daboku, later redubbed as the Mauler, as well as the Hatamoto Chi, and gained access to an assortment of battlemech designs from their allies, Comstar. Similar developments took place within the Free Worlds League and the Compelling Confederation, however not to the same extent as the Draconis Combine, at least at first. Under the functional leadership of the Gunji no Kunri Kurita Theodore, the Combine emerged victorious over the united strength of the Federated Commonwealth in the War of 3039, and in no small part due to their own expanded inventory of battlemechs and vehicles. With this war over, the scene seemed set, as technology continued to advance and unlock thanks to the Helm Memory Core, and more battlemechs were restored or upgraded with this technology. For a fifth devastating war, one with more advanced industries and battlefield participants, was seemingly destined to take place. The Federated Commonwealth would be forced to face off once more against the Captian Accord, but also, likely, their mutual ally, Comstar and their Comguards. The future seemed set in stone, until it wasn't. With their armies faced towards one another, the Inner Sphere was blindsided with the arrival of Operation Revival, otherwise known as the Clan Invasion. These new, seemingly alien invaders were powerful and ruthless, and struck like lightning across the northern fringe of the Inner Sphere and periphery. These invaders, however, made one big mistake, in that they attacked across too broad of a front, crashing into the Free Rosselhaig Republic, Draconis Combine, and Federated Commonwealth more or less, all at once. This helped these powers bury their long-standing grievances with one another, and allowed them, with time, to pivot their resources, whether that be industrial, scientific, or military, towards the clashes with the brutal invaders who took the Inner Sphere by storm. While the Clan Invaders' doctrine worked against their invasion of the Inner Sphere in many ways, their real advantages lay in their rigorously drilled and dedicated warrior caste, but also, and more precisely, in their significantly more sophisticated battlemechs and equipment. To give context to this gulf in equipment, a 1-ton Clan ER medium laser has almost the same performance, barring 1 damage, as a 5-ton Inner Sphere large laser. This weapon will outperform its Inner Sphere medium laser counterpart in major ways too, as you're probably already presuming, in both range and damage, and is only inferior in the amount of heat it generates. Inner Sphere ER large lasers are notoriously poor in their performance compared to their clan counterparts as well, not only weighing more, but having no attribute where they are even comparable. And there are similarities across the board for other weapon systems too. Worse still for the Inner Sphere, this is only in the realm of weaponry. Even components like engines and basic mech construction were enormously behind their clan adversaries. However, there was one canon where the clans didn't quite possess the same advantage. The Gauss rifle is one of the most devastating offensive systems in the history of the world of Battletech, taking on the form of an advanced coil gun or a railgun, depending on how these are configured. These weapons have an incredible range and dangerous striking potential. With a hitting power of 15, each round from these magnetic marvels can instantly destroy almost any battle mech in the game with a lucky head strike, or through simply the annihilation of mechs through vicious, high-penetration rounds tearing their opposition apart. With an effective distance of up to 22 hexes in-game, there are few systems that can even hope to outrange them in order to attempt standoff engagements against machines that utilize these terrifying metal slug-throwing monstrosities. Many of the battle mechs fielded by armies of the Inner Sphere between 3049 and 3052, the timeframe of Operation Revival, were extremely overmatched by their clan counterparts, even ones using the vaunted technologies of the Star League. But there were multiple lessons learned in this desperate struggle for survival against a new threat. The Inner Sphere studied the harsh outcomes of these flashpoints carefully, and began to conceptualize machines that would stand up against their clan foes. These advanced mechs and vehicles were built in numbers that their new clan rivals could never hope to match. A tide of steel, a tide of vengeance, would be unleashed upon these arrogant foes. During the invasion, the once bitter rivalry between the Draconis Combine and Federated Commonwealth, as mentioned prior, took a backseat to the grim realities that the two states now faced in the bleak early days of the assault. This didn't happen immediately, mind you, but these new ties rapidly evolved into something more dynamic and powerful. A non-aggression pact was agreed upon between the Commonwealth and the Combine, one which opened the door for further cooperation, such as intelligence sharing. In fact, things took a step even further from that, as the three great houses more or less formed into a far more extensive and cooperative alliance to stand against the storm of the clans. During one point of the attack on the Inner Sphere, in a joint operation by the Federated Commonwealth with the Draconis Combine to relocate a battle mech factory on behalf of the Free Rosselhag Republic, engineers and designers from the two nations discussed, fatefully, just how to build a mech to engage the clan war machines in the future. The teams had started to work together smoothly, and had become familiar with one another by the point of these informal conversations about these hypothetical clan busters. These meetings became formalized, and a cooperative design, one built to stop clan battle mechs in their tracks, and fight them in their own range brackets, as a major anchor to their own forces in the brutal battles that were now raging across the Inner Sphere, was devised. This theoretical platform was to be constructed around a weapon system that could almost match its clan counterparts, the Gauss rifle. Unlike other existing and known Inner Sphere designs at the time, this particular mech would be meant to be configured in such a way as to operate multiple Gauss rifles, rather than just one. What emerged from this was a brand new battle mech design, a mobile assault platform that was capable of crippling a clan mech in a single volley, the Gunslinger. The name has two primary meanings, as you might expect. The first is because this new beast of a battle mech carries some big irons, and one would be wise to recognize that. Though unsaid, it's also clear that the Gunslinger, a joint project between two states that were once rivals, and now unified in an alliance of necessity, perhaps harkened back to the age of the Star League, and its legendary battle mech aces of the SLDF, who were also named the Gunslingers. The SLDF was an international force from around the Inner Sphere, and thus, the spirit of who the Gunslingers were was in its own way imbued into this new behemoth. Just because it was designed during the invasion, however, didn't mean that this new monstrosity of a battle mech would be taking the field anytime soon. It took time to retool the appropriate factory lines and to begin production. The first mechs began walking off the line on Hesperus from Defiance Industries inside of the still unified Federated Commonwealth on December 5th, 3053. before being distributed into units in both the House Davion and Steiner sides of the Federated Commonwealth. Manufacturing in the Draconis Combine took more time, as engineers struggled with its construction, particularly around its Gauss rifles, and the first gunslingers left the Quinton plant, whose ownership is Independence Weaponry, in 3055. The mech's popularity was instantaneous with mech warriors within the three houses. It was finally an equalizer to be put into the field against the seemingly invincible clans. As many gunslingers as possible were produced by the two major states, and still demand was high despite this intense output. It performed exceptionally well for the emerging Lyran alliance, as the Federated Commonwealth began to fragment, in battles waged against the Free Worlds League as well as against Clan Jade Falcon during its infamous incursion against Lyran territories. Unfortunately for the clans, the rash attack by Clan Jade Falcon had consequences, namely for Clan Smoke Jaguar, as the Star League reformed in response to the clan's aggression. Once more the great houses had united. The clans had sowed the wind and would now reap the whirlwind. One clan in particular had been the primary instrument of unleashing the chaos and destruction of Operation Revival, and that had been the Smoke Jaguars. Now they would face not only the wrath of the Draconis Combine, but of the combined task force of a new Star League defense force. Operation Bulldog is one of the most successful anti-clan operations in history. This massive undertaking's goal was to reclaim all of the lost territory of the Draconis Combine from the Jaguars, and to see them wholly removed from the Inner Sphere. Not only was the military campaign a success, it was an overwhelming one, as the Smoke Jaguars were checked and smashed at every turn. The Gunslinger not only played a role in this, it played a prominent one, as it was deployed by 3 of the major house armies that participated in the battle. Most notably though was the Battle of Pesht during this climactic conflict. Clan Smoke Jaguar made a bold counterpush against the DCMS's 7th Sword of Light Regiment with their 3rd Assault Cluster. While the Jaguars by this stage of the clan invasion era were a shadow of their former selves in many respects, a significant formation like the 3rd Assault Cluster was by no means toothless. Unfortunately for the Jaguars, the 7th Sword of Light had been provided with 2 full lances of Gunslinger battle mechs, the majority of a company. These were organized into 2 direct fire lances, acting as a fire break for a critical encounter. When the Jaguars launched their counterattack, the 2 Gunslinger lances were rapidly deployed by dropship ahead of the cluster's advance, where they were forced into a direct conflict with this wall of steel and magnetic cannons. What followed was a storm of destruction as the 2 lances coordinated, catching the Jaguars in a vicious crossfire, stopping their advance cold. Worse for the Jaguars yet, the 7th Sword of Light's main force then struck without mercy into the 3rd Assault Cluster's flank and rear, catching the enemy counterattack in a pincer. After the engagement, the Gunslingers themselves were attributed as knocking out a dozen enemy battle mechs, for a loss of 6 Gunslingers. Its role and very existence, however, would be put into jeopardy with the collapse of the 2nd Star League, as the cooperation required to build these machines at scale, with various parts being shared between multiple powers, broke down. But even then, during the Fedcom Civil War and beyond, the Gunslinger was a prominent military asset, and one which was prized by its operators, often finding a home in premier units of the LCAF, AFFS, and DCMS. An assault mech weighing in at 85 tons, the Gunslinger is one of the first major projects launched by the Inner Sphere to answer the clan's superiority in technology. While it is not a complete match for many clan Omnimechs, when it is a part of a well-planned force, this gunslinging battle mech's attributes make it one of the deadliest things a clan warrior can encounter when squaring off against the Inner Sphere's great houses. With a chassis built to handle 2 powerful cannons, and one which was inspired by but not based on the Crocket, or as the Combine calls it, the Katana. The Gunslinger in its base form, the Gun2 ER, is unquestionably a standout mech from the post-Operation Revival era. It does what the package promises. It will stop Clan Omnimech forces in their tracks when employed correctly. Its base Star League XT chassis uses standard materials, resulting in it weighing 8.5 tons. But this is necessary in order to save critical space for its other major components. Beyond this, due to the era of its manufacturing, the 1ERD has a standard gyro and cockpit. When moving into the cooling system on board, the Gunslinger benefits greatly from double heat sinks, as it has no need to invest additional tonnage into them. The nature of its offensive power really does mean that it will run cool with this loadout, and this greatly benefits this colossal collaborative project. When it comes to its electronic systems, the Gunslinger comes stock with a Nishan Quarlet Comsys communications package, as well as a Nishan Diana Mark II targeting and tracking system, though neither of these offered any additional bonuses on their own. It does possess a Beagle active probe, which will attempt to help the mech overcome enemy ECM systems, or find hidden assets. When it comes to quirks that are used in the advanced rules, the only documented one for it as of the making of this video is the Cowl trait. This gives its head improved durability when attacked from the sides or rear. Costs weigh on mech performances in general, and due to the advanced nature of its weaponry on board, the Gunslinger has an in-game battle value cost of just under 2,300, and a heavy production cost for the states of the Inner Sphere when it first began production in the 3050s. To give some perspective, the Timberwolf Prime has a battle value of around 2,700, whereas the STK-5M Stalker, a previous generation upgrade of the venerable design introduced in 3050, has a battle value floating around 1,600. The Gunslinger's cost necessitates that it uses its tonnage and other elements at a high level of competence, so let's see how it does. An 85-ton assault mech is never going to be quick on its feet, barring very extreme and potentially hazardous upgrades, and you should not expect this for the Gun1 ERD, or really any of the current Gunslinger designs. It is a lumbering monstrosity of a fighter, rather than a sleek and agile warrior. This means that movement was not the key priority of its Kurita and Steiner Davion designers when they conceptualized it. There are reasons for this. If its engine was too large, it'd sacrifice too much, and not be able to employ the main weaponry that the mech was built around. So, speed takes a back seat on the 1ERD, and for good cause. The decision was made to power the mech with a 6.5-ton Vox 255 extra light engine, giving it a maximum speed of 54 km per hour or 5 movement points in the tabletop game. Being an assault mech, its main role is breakthrough and counter-breakthrough, and this very much shows in its engine choice. This level of mobility means that the Gunslinger can be caught, isolated, and outflanked by significantly faster adversaries, though machines that are only slightly quicker will struggle to achieve this vital action. It is important to note that its XL engine is a potential weakness in and of itself if the mech loses a side torso, as the loss of a side torso will mean that the machine is immediately disabled and removed as an active participant from any battle. For campaigns, this may not be the end of the world, if spare components are to hand for repairs, but for independent engagements this is a major exploit an opponent can focus on to achieve an effective kill. The final element of the Gunslinger's agility is its pair of Hildco Model 12 jump jets, which allow it to leap up to 60 meters, or 2 hexes. In terms of tabletop value, this is next to useless. It generates almost no defensive bonuses, it leaps only a very short distance, and it will make targeting more difficult after their use. Narratively, these jump jets have one purpose, and that is to assist the mech in overcoming steep or severe obstacles that might be in its path. Essentially, they're not very combat-oriented in this instance. In totality, the Gunslinger is slow, and that can be a weakness. While it is not as plodding as, say, an Annihilator or Urban Mech, which would make it tactically so limited it would struggle in most engagements, its lack of mobility can be felt if it's not managed correctly. and this will be a weakness a wise enemy will attempt to exploit. The armored triangle is an important thing to remember when looking at various roles battlemechs can fill. With the Gunslinger not being quick, it means it has to win in the other two primary categories, or the mech would be an absolute flop. Thankfully for the battlemech in question, and the mech warriors that take it into battle, when it comes to defense, the Gun2 ER is extremely well served for its tonnage and role. Once more due to limitations with its internal space, the Gunslinger doesn't utilize specialist components when it comes to its armored protection. But this isn't that big a deal in the broad scheme of things, as it doesn't need it, because it has 15.5 tons of Kevlar 5000 standard plating, giving it a massive 248 points of armor to distribute across the frame. This makes it very tough to crack open, which is a good thing because it is, after all, meant to engage clan battlemechs in direct combat. However, its defensive attributes don't end with it simply being slathered in a high volume of steel, but also with it benefiting from an invisible layer of defense from a Guardian ECM, giving it assistance when scrambling enemy sensors under some conditions. Overall, the Gunslinger is well guarded, as it by necessity should be. With a name like the Gunslinger, you'd expect it to be heavily armed. Given that we've covered what this mech was literally built around prior to the full breakdown of it, it's not hard to imagine that this mech definitely rates high on the ability to reduce and destroy enemy targets. Its loadout was designed to confront clan battlemechs, so let's take a look at how it does that. First up, it has a pair of Poland main Model A Gauss cannons, with one in each arm. When these guns sing, everyone listens. Headcapping and ripping through battlemechs and tanks are their main purpose, and they do that very well. Even clan mechs of nearby tonnages can struggle to have the vicious output these two guns can deliver turn on turn. They are also supplied with 2 tons of ammunition each, meaning the 1 ERD will have a presence in a battle for more than a few shots, before needing to return to the rear for resupply. But, were this mech only 34 tons of Gauss equipment strapped onto a machine, even if that is impressive in its own way, it'd not be very viable at its tonnage and mobility level. So what else is on board to give this mech an additional bite? Well, to start with, it has 4 Defiance B3M medium lasers, split evenly between its side torsos. The medium laser, much like the Gauss rifle, gives a great return on tonnage for the inner sphere, as it is 5 damage for only 3 heat, making it another competitive weapon against the clans, even if their range isn't exceptional. This also means it can pair these lasers up with its magnetic projectile throwers to really bring the pain onto a target if they start getting into its close range. As an important note, the Gunslinger with its forward-facing equipment can alpha strike every turn with no heat buildup, even if it runs or jumps. Every ton on board a mech like this is vital, and unfortunately there is one small misstep, in that it has 2 leg-mounted, rear-facing Defiance P5M medium pulse lasers. Using these obviously prevents the Gunslinger from kicking, and their odd placement in the legs is a bit of a headache under most conditions. Rear-facing pulse lasers aren't inherently a bad idea, mind you, as most backstabbing battlemechs do want to get in close. It's just a problematic location for them to be placed in. As a final contribution, it has a head-mounted small laser. Overall, the weaponry on board the Gunslinger for 3053 is extremely powerful, and it really represents one of the first of the Inner Sphere's Gauss boats. The Gunslinger 1 ERD is an intensely powerful machine for the era in which it was built. Its designers, realizing Gauss weaponry was the greatest potential balancer with their clan counterparts, created a machine that, when used with other forces, will surprise and overwhelm its arrogant clan adversaries. While it was predated by several other clan-busting designs, typically employed by the Com Guards, like their variant of the King Crab, these weren't in service fully with the Federated Commonwealth or the Draconis Combine. And so for these states, the Gunslinger represented a massive leap forward when engaging their technologically superior enemies. Clan Jade Falcon, and even more so Clan Smoke Jaguar, were given a front-row display of what economies of scale, from an enemy using smartly constructed, near-peer designs, could really put on the field. The Gunslinger is a sniper, a frontline fighter, and an absolute menace to deal with, as each turn it throws Gauss slugs downrange with devastating results. Of course, it's by no means perfect. If not supported correctly, it can be flanked and overwhelmed, even if it has its rear-firing weaponry to try to prevent this. It is also not a match for clan assault mechs in many conditions such as one-on-one engagements either. And of course, its XL engine is a key weakness that can result in it being prematurely knocked out of a battle, should it lose a side torso. Regardless of these faults, they are tolerable in the face of its twin Gauss rifles and its battery of medium lasers, as well as its incredibly thick armored hide. No mech is an island, at least amongst the soldiers of the Inner Sphere, but all the same, the Gunslinger will have its role to play, and anyone who is brought into its sights will face obliteration, as it cracks their armor open with a relentless wave of nickel-iron slugs. During the 31st century, only one major, frontline variant of the Gunslinger would be put into service, and that was the Gun2 ER, first manufactured in 3062, making its appearance during the fractious era of the FedCom Civil War. This refinement of the original was much more of a facelift, rather than a wholesale redesign of an already successful battle mech. Its internal systems on board remained identical to the original, from its internal structure to its engine. Its primary weapons remain in place, in the form of its twin Gauss rifles, and it retains its Guardian ECM, but after this, there are changes that occur. First, it upgrades its medium lasers to Inner Sphere tech level extended range medium lasers, which can make it possible for the mech to now overheat due to their increased thermal output. Its rear-firing medium pulse lasers, small laser, and Beagle active probe are all removed, but in order to make two significant changes. Namely, it installs an additional jump jet, letting it functionally use its jump jet capabilities more meaningfully in combat, but more importantly, it also installs a C3 master. The C3 master lets the mech act as a center of a C3 network. Given its durability, this makes it even more of an anchor for a C3-enabled force. This Gunslinger, in other words, is more than just a vicious fighter, but a leader of mech formations. The Inner Sphere changed wildly between the FedCom Civil War and the Dark Age. The destruction of the Word of Blake and the rise of the Republic of the Sphere were the largest major shifts, but other critical events came to pass as well. The rise of the Ghost Bears, now the Rosselhague Dominion, put pressure on the Combine after it lost 2 wars fighting the Bears, for instance. Mech production slowed across the board, and disarmament took place, mostly helping the houses shed older, obsolete equipment and keeping military levels to a certain mandate. Of course, everyone cheated, to some degree, trying to retain an advantage in the realm of military engagements, should they emerge. But this was largely an era of peace. Because of changes to the map of the Inner Sphere, with so many powers now occupying regions that had once been the border between the Draconis Combine and Lyran Commonwealth, funnily enough, it helped improve relations between the two old enemies. Steiner, now no longer attached to Davion, and no longer bordering House Kurita, more or less began to see value in working with the Dragon. It would seem, at least in the realms of economics, both states saw their relations with the Republic of the Sphere improve as well, even if they had dissenters within their own ranks who wished to see this power at the heart of the Inner Sphere decline. Prior to the HPG blackout, prior to the Inner Sphere going dark, and war emerging once more on a catastrophic scale, the Gunslinger received a major update from the 3 powers as they formed a loose, cooperative arrangement with one another. This new Gunslinger used parts from major powers involved. Most notably, it used a Clantech quality engine that came from the Lyran Commonwealth, and ballistics reactive armor which for the most part comes from the Draconis Combine. The first of these monsters walked off the assembly lines of Defiance Industries and Independence Weaponry as if it were the golden era of cooperation once more, in 3131. While the Republic was involved in the mech's development in some way, it, as of this time, is not listed as one of this mech's operators, likely failing to receive any waves of production from either manufacturer before the Inner Sphere descended into madness. August of 3132 saw the blackout take place, only 1 year after these titans were produced for their respective manufacturers. Relations with the Republic from the Combine side collapsed, even before the removal of House Kurita from the throne they had forged centuries earlier. The entire main branch of this ancient house was annihilated by one warlord Toranaga Masuhari, who then installed Sakamoto Yori into power, the descendant of Kurita Theodore through his bastard Franklin. This led to the Draconis Combine waging war as it never had before, catching the Federated Sons at a time where it had poor leadership and was unprepared for the Dragon's wrath. With war on its primary borders with the other Inner Sphere powers, the Dragon lost its connection to the Lyran Commonwealth, which was following Toranaga in their own ambitious plans to reshape the Inner Sphere seemingly. Both lost access to key technologies, however, to reliably build the Gunslinger. It appears as though the Lyrans coped with this more easily, finding replacement sources for the ballistic reinforced armor, but the Combine, on the other hand, found itself in a very problematic position. The Clantech XL engine that the mech ran on was not so easily replaced. Even after the destruction of Clan Novacat, at the hands of the Dragon no less, the problem was not solved with the absorption of their infrastructure. The Novacats, it appears, did not have a facility that could produce the specific engine size of the Gunslinger, and the engineers at the Combine have yet to be able to retool the Novacat's advanced production facilities to enable this possibility. Such was the popularity of the mech, and the need for it, that the situation has left the Combine in a state where they actively raid the Raven Alliance and Rosselhaig Dominion, either for new parts or salvage, to acquire the engines necessary to build the Gunslinger's latest iteration. Often in desperation, they even go as far as to trade with Clan Seafox for these parts, when no other path is available to them, and at almost criminal prices. Both of the manufacturers of this battlemech are now in need of it more than ever. The Draconis Combine, despite its many victories against the Federated Sons and the Republic of the Sphere, now finds itself in a desperate battle to hold on to what is left of its gains, all while the Rosselhaig Dominion, having gone into a wild, self-destructive fury, throws itself into the side of the Dragon when it believes it is weakest, for its own gains. The Lyran Commonwealth, after bankruptcy and the near-complete collapse of the state, too finds itself embroiled in conflicts across its frontiers. The former Jade Falcon occupation zone is now a war zone, and one which elements of the almost decentralized Lyrans are finding themselves drawn towards. Worse still, their periphery-facing border is crumbling, as long-conquered territories begin to slip from their fingers, seeking to find their own destinies. As if that wasn't bad enough, there remains the potential for conflict with the Wolf Empire, or if the Commonwealth isn't careful, the Free Worlds League, yet another powerful nemesis it cannot afford to antagonize at this moment in their history. In all this conflict, in all of this carnage, the Gunslinger is a desired machine. Its tried and tested reliability has performed for a century, first turning back the clan menace, and now standing against the darkness that is the active crisis both of its manufacturing states now face. Just like the mech aces of old, the Gunslinger stands prepared to fight for its masters, to the bitter end. If the leaders of these nations are wise, they will be used instead to fight for a future where that end is avoidable. The most sophisticated variant of the Gunslinger to date, the Gun2 ER is amongst the many designs that now use a combination of inner sphere and clan technologies. Despite its production problems, it really is an exceptional upgrade over the original, and for multiple reasons. First comes in the form of its 255 Clantech XL engine, the one that the Combine is currently deprived of. The engine takes up less critical space than the originals, and ensures that if a side torso is lost, the mech may limp back for repairs or continue fighting as needed. Just as significant, it uses 20.5 tons of ballistic reinforced armor. This might be the best armor type in the game, as it reduces most forms of damage without leaving the mech deficient in other ways. Whereas hardened armor reduces almost everything, ballistic reactive armor instead diminishes missiles and ballistic weaponry. But this is still enormously effective, as unlike hardened, it doesn't suffer mobility issues. This makes the 3ERD extremely durable. This fighting machine also, since we're talking about its defense, has Case 2 systems for its volatile materials on board, making it even harder to remove. Though it is important to note that it does lose its Guardian ECM. One key weakness is added in order for the mech to save weight, however, as it does support an XL gyro, making it more likely, unfortunately, to be knocked out by a through-armor critical. After these changes, however, we get into the main course, which is, as you can guess, its weaponry. 3 small X-pulse lasers replace the 2 rear-firing medium-pulse lasers and the head-mounted small laser. These are better at dealing with infantry and light targets, and likely make more sense in this role. Its 4 inner sphere medium lasers are upgunned to 4 Clantech ER medium lasers, making them hit almost as hard as inner sphere large lasers, and with the same range, a worthy and terrifying upgrade. It retains its standard Gauss rifles, which have more than adequately done their job for decades by the time this first stepped into the war zones of the inner sphere. All of these changes together make the 3ERD an exceptionally more durable, yet hard-hitting battle mech. It is a ruthless and pragmatic mixed tech upgrade of a still formidable juggernaut, and it is one of the deadlier weapons in the arsenals of the Lyran Commonwealth and Draconis Combine. When the clans first invaded the inner sphere, there were few battle mechs that could stand firm in the face of their assault. Even legendary titans like the Atlas could only act as a breakwater, and would often be overwhelmed by the storm of the assault. What the clans hadn't anticipated, from their own alien experience of warfare in the Kerensky cluster, was that their assault would be their ultimate undoing. During the initial wave, vast amounts of resources were redirected into producing tried and tested, traditional mechs and vehicles to repair the legions of the Great Houses. The Gunslinger is one of the best examples of this, and is also an example of people setting aside their differences for the greater good and self-preservation. In a bizarre way, in my own view, I think the Gunslinger was a symbol of hope when it was first introduced, especially based on the accounts of its popularity and operational history. It demonstrated that all of the fighting and dying on behalf of the defenders had not been for nothing. For those that had fallen, those that had failed to stop the onslaught so far, those that died defending their families, their fellow citizens, or strangers they barely knew but for a righteous cause, and even those that simply died because they were paid to, had bought their comrades time. Time to learn. Time to rearm and re-equip. Time to dare to hope. It showed that the people of the inner sphere could come together, not to squabble over past grievances, but in mutual respect and cooperation to save themselves, but also to save one another, just as the Lords of the Star League had promised to do when it formed for the first time, centuries earlier. Before the Second Star League even could take shape by itself, the Gunslinger was an echo of the spirit of cooperation that had once been, come to haunt the invaders who came to destroy the way of life of the people in the inner sphere. When Clan Jade Falcon assaulted Coventry, they set into motion a greater humiliation than the Battle of Tukiad. They completed the process of uniting the Inner Sphere. Even the Capellan Confederation and Free Worlds League, nations which did not share borders with the clan invasion corridor, would no longer stand idly by. First, the Falcons were stopped dead in their tracks, before the fury of the Inner Sphere was unleashed upon the Smoke Jaguars. At the head of these formations, in the thickest of fighting, was the Gunslinger, as if they were the pilots of the ancient SLDF themselves, fighting in the spirit they were seemingly made for. The irony being, after the implosion of cooperation in the Inner Sphere, after the Blakest era, and during the Dark Age, the only time the Gunslinger could be built without great difficulty was under the conditions of cooperation between the great houses. The reality and message behind this should not be lost on anyone. To quote Recognition Guide 27, the Gunslinger may be one of the galaxy's cruelest jokes, a weapons platform that could only be produced during a time of peace. I actually disagree with this a great deal. The Gunslinger is a mech that can only be built when the great houses are cooperating, when they are not squabbling or arrogantly undermining one another. The Gunslinger was built for war, but it was built by many nations working towards a common goal, in a war of mutual security. If it survives into the future as a major presence in the setting, it will only be if the spirit of unity between the great houses returns. I have my doubts that its future is bright. Not for a long time, anyway. But in Battletech, there is always hope that even for a moment, people can set aside their differences. And if the clan invasion proved anything, it's that that flicker of light, no matter how dim, is hard to put out, and can be the catalyst for a much greater inferno. The summer grass is all that remains of a soldier's dreams. The summer grass, the splendid dreams of samurai warriors. Thank you all for joining me here today. I hope this piece wasn't too long-winded, but I'm obviously a pretty big fan of the Gunslinger, and I always have been. Technical Readout 3055 is my favorite TRO, and while my other videos covering these mechs may have been met with mixed reception, I really wanted to see if I could give this one, which has a plastic miniature in the Northwind Highlanders Lance Pack, a bit more of a showing. This will be the last 3055 mech I cover this year, or at least that is the plan. And before I forget, the excellent color art I used in the thumbnail was provided to me by Guillermo Espinos, who did an amazing job with it. I'm going to have a link to his Deviant art in the top pinned comment, which is also where I'm going to post all the resources I used to make this video. If you enjoyed this presentation on the Gunslinger, don't forget to smash the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. It does help if you enjoyed it, I promise. On top of that, I want to directly thank all of the YouTube channel members who support this content, because this is really only made possible because of viewers like you. With that, what do you all think of the Gunslinger? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you all there.